And someone facing a fight is Sir Vince Cable, who is running again. The former Lib Dem business secretary, of course, joins us in the studio. Morning to
Morning.
you. First of all, why aren't you Liberal Democrats and those of your colleagues still in Parliament trying to block this election? After all, you said the Constitution should be changed under the coalition. We should have this thing called a Fixed-Term Parliament Act. It was good for government. The first time it's tested, you abandon it.
Well, I think the principle of fixed-term parliaments is a good one because it provides stability. But, I mean, what has happened with the Brexit vote, and particularly the way that Theresa May is pursuing it, is taking the country in a completely different direction and, in our view, in the wrong direction. And we think this is a sufficiently important issue that we're willing to engage in the election enthusiastically, and we're optimistic.
And enthusiastically enough for you to want to come back. I mean, gently point out, you're in your 70s now. You might have seen it as an opportunity to sit in a deck chair and travel the world. Why do you want to come back?
I think several reasons. I do feel strongly that the country is going in the wrong direction, primarily about Europe and Brexit, but not just that. And the cuts we're seeing in local schools, the neglect of environmental issues. I've been in politics much of my adult life. I feel passionately about these things. I want to keep going. And I think another reason is that 2015, what happened was a terrible election for us. Despite the fact that I think I and my colleagues made a contribution to the country within the coalition. And I think we want to set the record straight and win back the seats that we lost.
Now, the message coming from your leader, Tim Farron, is vote for us to stop hard Brexit. Vote for us to keep us in the single market. Unless you form a government, unless Tim Farron is our next Prime Minister, there is not the slightest hope, is there, of stopping the sort of Brexit you don't like, because the Conservatives will have a majority, or Labour might have a majority, and they will be saying, we've got to respect the will of the people.
Well, we're respecting the will of the people. We accept the referendum result. But, of course, it's the nature of the way Brexit happens and the course of these negotiations which is now at issue. And having a substantial block of MPs, we will be able to hold them to account. And when the decision...
Really, forgive me, but even if Theresa May is able, let's assume it's her for a second rather than Jeremy Corbyn, is able to say, look, I stood on a mandate to deliver Brexit. I have won the election. And she will say to you, you do not have the mandate. You do not have popular support to do this.
Well, I think there are two plausible outcomes in 2 years' time. One is that we get a very, very bad deal. And the other, that we get no deal at all and we finish up crashing out of the European Union with disastrous economic consequences. And if that is the case, there needs to be a strong party in Parliament which is willing to say, no, this is not acceptable and this issue needs to be reopened.
And at that stage, of course, you might call for another election or indeed another referendum.
Yes, there's a variety of options. But the key point is that if there is a very substantial group of Lib Dem MPs in Parliament, we will have those options. And we don't at the moment.
Now, one thing you could promise to do as a party is to do a deal with the Labour Party, is to say, look, we do think Theresa May and the Tories are going in the wrong direction. We are ready to form some sort of arrangement, it doesn't have to be a coalition, to support a Labour Prime Minister. No, it doesn't even necessarily have to be Jeremy Corbyn, who might try and frustrate what is happening now.
No, there is no prospect of us having an electoral deal with the Labour Party, but obviously we vote with individuals and with parties on particular issues. On the Europe issue, for example, our colleagues in Parliament voted with Ken Clarke, and obviously there are like-minded Labour MPs, and as legislation goes through Parliament, the so-called Repeal Act, our colleagues and hopefully some of us joining them will be able to work with other parties. And
you're an old Labour man yourself.
But that's quite difficult.
You used to be a member of the Labour Party many years ago, to be fair. And you've argued for coalitions as a good form of government. Why wouldn't it be right to say, not that you will definitely, but if it looks like the best outcome after the election, that's what you'll do to stop Theresa May?
Well, first of all, I think it's utterly remote to believe that Jeremy Corbyn could become Prime Minister in coalition or without. I mean, I think it's just way beyond what's possible. And I think our differences with him on substantive issues are so great that it's very difficult to see any form of coalition being formed. That's not to say that on particular issues we would vote with them. I mean, I voted with Jeremy Corbyn on the Iraq war, against it, and there will be other issues of that type.
Just brief final one. In 2010, you went to the Labour Party and said, get rid of Gordon Brown, bring David Miliband in, and you've got a deal. So you could do the same with Jeremy Corbyn, couldn't you?
That's not on the cards. I think the prospect of the Labour Party getting into power or holding the balance of power are so remote we shouldn't be thinking about those scenarios. Our objective is to get a substantial block of MPs into Parliament so that we could substantially affect the Brexit outcomes, hopefully stop a bad outcome if that's what happens.
Vince Cable. Sir Vince Cable, thank you for joining.
And come to the Commons to start the process of triggering this general election on June the 8th. And could the election see the resurgence of the Liberal Democrats? With me is one man hoping to win back his seat in Twickenham in southwest London. He is, of course, the former Cabinet Minister, Liberal Dem Business Secretary in the coalition government. Sir Vince Cable, welcome to you. So it's definite you're going to fight this seat?
Well, there are formalities before you're adopted, but I'd certainly like to throw my hat in the ring, and I think we have a good chance of winning, given what's happening in the country.
I've got to ask you, if we hadn't been heading for an early election, would you have stood in 2020?
Well, I'd always made it very clear that if the election was early, I was up for it, but, you know, over 5 years, one has got to get on with my life. But anyway, that's academic, it's happening, and, you know, some of us feel very strongly the country's heading in the wrong direction, and I just want to be in there and fight to turn this round.
You lost by 2,000 votes. Richmond Park had a by-election recently where next door to you, where the Liberal Democrats did extremely well. So how confident are you?
Well, there is a similar demographic. I think the Remain vote in Twickenham was about 70%. And obviously I respect the views of the 30% who didn't vote that way, but I think even many of them are anxious that the way that the Prime Minister's led this, in terms of this very hard Brexit, pulling us out of the single market, out of the customs union, out of research collaborations with our universities and scientific centres, this is very, very damaging.
I mean, she says that basically, and the Brexit Minister, David Davidson, said that follows from the country's decision to withdraw, that you can't be half in and half out.
Well, I simply don't accept the reasoning. I mean, that there is it's perfectly plausible to keep almost all of the features of the single market. You could have some restrictions on migration, and making sure that if people have got a job before they come here. Certainly the customs union, which is absolutely fundamental to our supply chain industries like cars and aerospace. Absolute disaster if that were to go.
Do you think that, I mean, what difference is it going to make if Vince Cable or Nick Clegg or some of your other colleagues are back in Parliament? It's still going to be a small group of MPs, and the country's still going to be heading out to the European Union.
Well, we've been punching well above our weight when we only had 8 or 9. I think we've had a substantially larger blow. We will make a difference. The crunch time will come in 2 years when we have the outcome of the negotiations, and particularly if it's a bad result, or if we're forced to crash out of the European Union because there's no agreement. It's absolutely vital that there is a group of people who are in there, in Parliament, making the case that this whole process is stopped.
So you will seriously be saying, stop, don't leave the European Union?
Subject to what is negotiated. But in the meantime, there's the repeal bill. It needs constant, diligent attention to what
So what about
doing.
the decision taken in the referendum last year? I mean, you're just going to push that to one side?
No, it's happened. Parliament's now voted. The negotiations are happening, but we're in a new game. I mean, we don't know how the European Union countries are going to respond.
Many people, I was just speaking to Anna Soubry, for example, who would agree with you on the result of the referendum. She says, look, you've got to accept it. We are leaving the European Union. We have accepted
that the referendum has taken place. We've accepted the result. Parliament has voted to stop the negotiations.
You just said to me you wanted to stop the whole thing.
What all I'm saying is that when we see the outcome, it may be a complete disaster. Surely, at that point, people and the country will want to have a second thought.
But the choice then, surely, is to accept the deal or to have no deal and leave, not to try and stay.
Well, there may be other options than accepting a very bad deal or no deal, and surely there must be options under those circumstances.
No, but sometimes the Liberal Democrats talk about this idea of having another referendum.
Well, this has been, in a way, this has been overtaken by events. We're having a general election, where the public will now have an opportunity to express.
So referendum is not going to be one of
I don't think you should necessarily rule it out. I say it all depends as to what comes of these negotiations. They could be favourable to the UK, they could be very unfavourable, or there could be no result, and we completely crash out with all their existing relationships torn out. And we've got to keep our options open.
But the key question is whether you are seriously saying to the voters, we really could reverse that historic decision and end up staying. Are you saying that's a possibility?
That is a possibility, of course, and we must keep that possibility alive in case the outcome is completely unacceptable.
And in the circumstances we find ourselves in, is that a possibility which you welcome?
I don't know what's going to come of this. I think Theresa May, possibly because she's too worried about people on the right wing of her party, has headed in a direction which is more likely to encourage a bad outcome than a good outcome. I mean, it is possible to see how we can change our relationship with Europe and reform it in a positive way. I'm certainly up for that. I'm not a dogmatic belief in everything that the European Union is doing. But if they produce a complete break in our trade relationship, the customs union, research collaboration, somebody has to be there to say no.
And can you, at this stage, say, whatever the outcome of the general election, hand on heart, the Liberal Democrats will not be going back into government in coalition either with Labour or Conservative?
I think it's wildly improbable we're going to go back into government. Wildly improbable.
But why not say you're not going to do it?
Well, we're not going to do it because we don't know the outcome of the election. But it's wildly improbable. Jeremy Corbyn is not prime ministerial, is not going to come anywhere close to government, and we accept that's the new political reality. What the country needs is an effective opposition, and that's what we're going to provide.
But was it a fatal error to go into coalition with the Conservatives?
No, it wasn't a fatal error. In those circumstances, in 2010, no, it wasn't. It wasn't a fatal or any other kind of error. The country had a financial emergency. We needed a stable government. Nick Clegg's judgment was absolutely right. I supported it. I worked with him for 5 years. We suffered politically, and obviously I regret that. I was one of the casualties, but it was the right thing to have done, and I don't apologise for it.
And within the realities of the political situation now, how far do you think the Liberal Democrats can recover?
Well, I'm not giving numbers, but I think we will certainly win back quite a bit of the ground that we lost, and maybe in other areas too. I mean, anything is possible.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Vince Cable, Sir Vince Cable, standing in this new election. Well, this is the scene